Good morning, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. Thanks for joining us here on CBS News. Congress has passed a bipartisan bill to keep the government funded and avert a shutdown, at least for now. Lawmakers struck a deal last night with only a few hours remaining before that midnight deadline. Both the House and Senate voted to approve the funding measure to keep federal agencies open through November 17th. And in a dizzying turn of events, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy dropped his demands for steep spending cuts and relied on Democratic votes for passage of the bill. Now, it increases federal disaster assistance funding, but does not include aid for Ukraine, which, as you know, is a top priority for the White House. President Biden signed the measure late last night, saying he believed support for Ukraine would be approved later. Our teams in Washington have been following all of the developments this weekend. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry is at the White House, but we start with CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian there in our D.C. bureau. So, Nicole, let's talk about the bill. What's in it, what was dropped, and how did it finally pass?
Well, this is a pretty benign bill in the sense that it is a clean, continuing resolution. And what that means is it continues to fund the government at current spending levels for the next 45 days, roughly through November 17th. And then, of course, the hope is that we don't necessarily have to go through this process all over again. The hope is that by that time, Congress will have been able to pass all of its 12 appropriations bills to fund the government on a longer-term basis. But what is included in this package is disaster relief. That is money that the White House had asked for and requested. What's not in the bill is funding for Ukraine. And of course, this just comes not long after the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited both members in the House and in the Senate. And there does appear to be a desire to move forward with Ukraine funding, some type of Ukraine funding package, but that could be a much heavier lift in the House than it will be in the Senate.
Nicole, let's get deeper into that, because since this continuing resolution fully drops aid to Ukraine, and that is such a priority for the White House, but something that a growing number of House Republicans have expressed displeasure with, do you expect that funding will be able to pass as a standalone measure for Ukraine?
Well, that is probably what we will see happen. Again, we have to see kind of what form and shape it takes. I mean, in terms of the government funding package, the White House had put forth about $6 billion, or in the Senate version of the continuing resolution, because keep in mind the Senate had its own version, which included that Ukraine funding. And again, that was about $6 billion. We know the White House has asked for much more, upwards of $24 billion. So it remains to be seen, but it seems the logical next step would be to split it off into its own supplemental package. But again, as I mentioned, that could be a very heavy lift in the House, because we know a lot of conservative Republicans have expressed concerns about providing more funding to Ukraine. That's part of the reason why it was dropped out of this temporary government spending package, because it just would have held things up further. And to your question about how this got done so quickly, obviously it did require bipartisan support, both in the House and the Senate. But part of that was taking out some of those more controversial elements. So does it make it any easier to pass Ukraine funding? Probably not. But it does seem like Speaker McCarthy appears to be committed. Certainly Democrats are committing Speaker Kevin McCarthy to bringing a vote up. Again, what form and shape that takes remains to be seen.
Well, in our final remaining moments, I want to ask you about that uneasy alliance between House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader, and Democrats, who he was really forced to rely on in order to pass the measure. Do you expect that hardline Republicans are going to punish him for that?
Well, I think so long as the speaker has these very narrow margins, he will continue to face challenges. I mean, we know, for instance, that Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz has been a pretty vocal opponent of the speaker, and he has not really dropped his threat to put forth this motion to vacate, which is the procedure that would be needed to take as far as trying to potentially oust the speaker. But you heard the speaker pretty vociferously yesterday say bring it if someone wants to try to oust him. So I don't think the speaker is deterred or intimidated, and he has tried to kind of smack down these threats before. But again, as we move through this funding process to fund the government on a more long-term basis, and as we approach this deadline in mid-November, it's certainly possible we could see more tension and friction play out within the House Republican Conference.
Yeah, I think he said, if someone wants to remove me because I'm the adult in the room, go ahead and try. All right, Nicole Killian, thank you. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry is there at the White House and joins us now. So, Skylar, what's the White House saying about the broad strokes of this bill?
Hey, Lana, good to see you. Ultimately, that this bill essentially avoids what would have been a preventable crisis, in that it would have inflicted pain on millions of Americans. And now that this bill has passed, we see that active duty military troops will continue to get paid. There will not be those feared delays at airports across the country due to possible federal workers who could be impacted there. And that means that women and children will continue to get the necessary nutritional assistance that they need, along with so much more in this stopgap measure. Ultimately, that was one of the big fears and concerns, not only from the White House, but from many that we've heard from all across the country who were watching what was happening on Capitol Hill closely, in that this measure ultimately was needed in order to continue these paychecks coming for many Americans that were closely potentially being impacted by this. I mean, we're talking about 2 million federal civilian employees who were potentially at risk of either losing out on paychecks or being furloughed to something to that effect, or 2 million military personnel who could have been impacted as well. And that includes some of those men and women who were working down at the U.S.-Mexico border dealing with that migrant crisis. So I think a relieved White House, but President Biden put out a statement overnight ultimately saying that this was an avoidable crisis brought on by that group of hardline conservatives in the House that was essentially calling for deeper spending cuts, calling for these delays, ultimately saying that this was an avoidable situation, and that what the deal that they had agreed to previously, the White House and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, was something that they should have adhered to this entire time, and that this was an avoidable crisis.
We also saw in the president's statement there talking about aid for Ukraine, because that had certainly been a White House priority and something of a stumbling block for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy as he was trying to get other members of his caucus in line. Does the White House consider this continuing resolution stripping any funding for Ukraine a setback?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely a bit of a concern, especially if you look at what the president had to say about it. He went on to say that we cannot, under any circumstances, allow American support for Ukraine to be interrupted, and ultimately going on to say that he fully expects the speaker to keep his commitment to the people of Ukraine and secure passage of the support needed to help Ukraine at this critical moment. And as we've heard from not only the White House, but many top officials, and that's from bipartisan support as well, that they want to make sure that there is continued financial support for Ukraine. I mean, we saw Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting with the leaders of both chambers up on Capitol Hill in recent weeks. We know that he has a close relationship with President Biden, and we know his concerns about not receiving continued support monetarily and from a military perspective in terms of their war with Russia. Now, we know that there is continued support right now. There should be money that should last for the next several weeks or so, but we know that more Ukraine aid is absolutely a necessity. And that is according to Department of Defense officials, as well as from what we're hearing from the Ukrainian officials as well. And so what ultimately happens with this deal moving forward, the dialogue that we see in these 45 days and this as this stopgap measure continues to move through, I think it'll be absolutely interesting. We know that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, as you and Nicole talked about, he certainly has an uphill battle, if you will, in terms of trying to get enough support to pass a measure across that will continue support for Ukraine. We know that there is support in the Senate for this bill or for that funding. It ultimately just depends on what that looks like.
All right, Skylar Henry, thank you.
You bet.
As part of the continuing resolution, Congress also reauthorized the Federal Aviation Administration for 3 months. The FAA had been facing a shutdown on 2 fronts. Without funding, all safety improvements and air traffic controller training would have been halted. It also would have lost its authority to collect fuel and fare tax revenue, which generate more than $50 million daily. The FAA's new authorization runs through the end of the year, and funding is on the same ticking clock as the rest of the government. Well, coming up after the break, the new funding bill came after a scramble from lawmakers to reach a deal. We'll discuss the process of getting the bill to the president's desk and what to expect when it's crunch time once again with 2 former lawmakers. You're streaming CBS News.
You can't get answers in a tweet on Face the Nation. We try to separate the noise from the news. You need to be able to have an actual conversation.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you
Do
learned?
you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
As we've been reporting, Congress passed a stopgap spending bill last night in order to keep the government funded through November 17th, just hours before a midnight deadline. As is always the case, much of the negotiations and work that went into getting the legislation to the president's desk happened behind closed doors. I want to bring in now former Illinois Congresswoman Cheri Bustos and former Michigan Congressman Fred Upton to talk more about what went down on Capitol Hill last night. Welcome to you both. Part of the reason why it's great to be speaking with you is because you both actually served in Congress during the government shutdown of December 2018. Fred, take us behind the scenes. Explain how yesterday's deal was made to avoid what you went through and also why it really came down to the wire.
Well, it did come down to the wire. And, Kevin the speaker, tried every which way to have Republicans support keeping it open with a whole number of demands, particularly from the right flank. All of them went down. Every one of them failed. So at the end of the day, Kevin, to his credit, said, look, the only way we're going to keep the government open is if it's bipartisan. And in fact, virtually every Democrat voted for it, and more than half the Republicans as well. Senate passed it with an overwhelming margin last night. So we'll go through this again maybe 45 days from now before November 17th. But at the end of the day, Congress did the right thing. But man, there were a lot of federal employees who were sure worried that they wouldn't be going to work on Monday. And who knows how long it would have lasted.
And Sherry, year after year, it seems like lawmakers really can't seem to agree on spending. And then we find the nation on the verge of a shutdown. What needs to change in Congress?
Oh, gosh, that list is a long one at what needs to change in Congress. I mean, gosh, it's longer than this arm, I can tell you that. Look, Congress has this tendency to always go down to the wire. It did when Fred was there. It did when I was there. It will for many years. It's kind of not just the American way, but it's the human way, right? We're procrastinators. We get down to the wire. But what needs to change? First of all, the rules that Kevin McCarthy agreed to are just not sustainable. The fact that one member of the Republican conference can say they want to remove him from the speakership, all that leads to is Speaker McCarthy continually trying to appease all flanks of his party, and he cannot do that. When you have people on the far, far, far right that don't even want to keep government open, that's going to be a problem. I'm guessing when they're back in session on Monday, and it's here it is again tomorrow, they're going to be back in session again, that he's going to face that. And then there's going to be a decision made. Will Democrats help him keep his speaker's gavel, or will they just let the Republicans do this on their own? There's a lot of drama still to come, not only this 45-day period that we have, which, by the way, is less than a week before Thanksgiving, which will, again, get them down to this wire going into a holiday. So I think there's a lot more drama still to come, and the American public, unfortunately, will have to be on the receiving end of that.
Well, Fred, Sherry brought up really House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and some of the drama that he potentially faces. He came out really strongly against Democrats after the bill passed, despite actually asking Democrats for their support and then receiving it. Let's play a little bit of what he had to say.
The Democrats first wanted to adjourn. Can you imagine hours away from shutting down and they wanted to adjourn? Then they came down and all voted by a card to delay it, to delay it, to delay it. Then the leader went and took a magic minute to keep talking and delaying it and delaying it and delaying it.
So it was interesting how it seemed almost like the rhetoric changed between the pre-vote the appeal that McCarthy was issuing for setting aside partisanship and doing what's right for the American people, and then immediately after, as he tried to separate himself from the Democrats. So, Fred, I'll start with you. Do you think that McCarthy's speakership is now at risk? Do you think that he'll be punished by some of the more right members of his party?
Well, I suspect, looking at the news this morning, I suspect that some of those hardliners, Matt Gaetz and others, they're going to come to a decision on Monday. They're going to try to punish Kevin for working with the Democrats. Again, Kevin did the right thing. It was the only way to keep the government open. But I suspect that we'll have a vote as early as this next week, and hopefully it will fail, because when you have divided government and when you have such a small margin in the House, and Nancy Pelosi experienced the same thing when she was Speaker, when you change the rules so that just one member can offer a privileged motion to vacate the chair, you're gone unless you reach across the aisle. And Kevin showed that he finally could do that, keeping the government open on Saturday. But I suspect that there'll be a move as early as this week to try and bounce him. And he only survives if enough Democrats vote to table that resolution.
Now we're looking at them actually trying to tackle some of the issues that were holdups. Because remember, this is just a continuing resolution to keep the lights on for the next 45 days. I'm going to ask both of you really quickly. Do you think that we're going to come back to this right before Thanksgiving, or do you think that they're going to be able to actually iron out some of these details? Sherry, I'll start with you.
Well, I'll just take a guess at it, but my guess would be yes, we will be at the same point in 45 days. I'm guessing many members of Congress after this vote told their families, hey, not sure how Thanksgiving is going to go this year once again. So look, I think that it's this tendency to get down to the wire, to negotiate until the last moment. And I think we'll probably be seeing this again. That's a guess. And I hope I'm wrong on that.
All right, Fred, agree or disagree?
I agree with Sherry. I think we're going to be in the same box. I think maybe some of the bills will pass. They'll get outside of that continuing resolution. But we're going to be going through this drill, and big issues like Ukraine and others, which need to be addressed. Remember, the Senate passed a pretty good bill with 77 votes earlier in the week.
Yeah,
I think that'll be a template to get things done.
All right, I'm going to call that bipartisan agreement. Sherry Bustos, Fred Upton, thank you both. So a government shutdown and its wide-ranging consequences have been averted for now. After the break, we're going to take a closer look at the timeline leading up to the last-minute deal as the countdown clock restarts. You're streaming CBS News.
I know when I wake up on Sunday mornings and I step into this studio, I'm always looking at where the story goes next.
Weather turns extreme. CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Politics isn't a game. Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard? Politics is about policy. Was this the right way to actually get this done? I'm a voracious consumer of information, and I'm impatient. I don't like to be spun. To be moderator of Face the Nation is not an anchor, it's not an actress. You are up here to moderate a conversation. That means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy?
How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happiness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows.
We need to step up and help them.
And a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The National Transportation Safety Board says it will investigate a crash in Illinois that killed 5 people and forced hundreds of evacuations. A semi-truck carrying 7,500 gallons of anhydrous ammonia overturned in the southeast part of the state Friday evening. More than half of the toxic chemicals spilled out. It's not clear what caused the fatalities, but officials say they were not directly related to the ammonia leak. New York Governor Kathy Hochul says her state is dealing with a new normal after record-breaking downpours caused flooding across much of the metropolitan area on Friday. Nearly 8 inches of rain fell over parts of the city in just a few hours. The water led officials to close several subways and bus routes. Governor Hochul declared a state of emergency that will remain in effect over the next few days. No deaths have been reported as a result of the storm. And the police chief of a small Kansas town has been suspended more than a month after a controversial raid on a local newspaper. Chief Gideon Cody's suspension was first reported Friday by the Marion County Record, the same paper his department raided in August. Police seized personal cell phones, computers, and other equipment in that search. It drew condemnation from First Amendment advocates. Officers also raided the home of the paper's 98-year-old co-owner, Joan Meyer. She collapsed and died at her home the following day. And revisiting our top story, Congress passed a continuing resolution to keep the federal government open about 3 hours before the deadline that would have closed the doors for many offices starting Sunday morning. The last-minute scramble came after months of fighting over appropriations bills. The clock started on December 29th, 2022, after President Biden signed an omnibus bill funding the government through the 2023 fiscal year. Nearly 10 months later, the House had advanced only one of the 12 appropriation bills for the next fiscal year. And now the countdown restarts, and the timetable is even more compressed. Congress has to pass its 12 spending bills or an omnibus bill before funding runs out on November 17th. Well, that does it for now. I'm Lana Zach. Thanks for watching. You're streaming CBS News.